Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore concepts that allow us to broaden our view of the world. You'll hear interesting topics, meet fascinating guests, and discover who you really are. Using the time-tested practices of astrology, you'll learn how to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Astrology, art, and spiritual adventure on Turning of the Wheel TV with Chris Flisher. Hey, welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. This is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure, but today I'm going to be in the realm of astrology. And I've been working my way through the science gradually, and today we're going to talk about Libra. Many astrologers refer to it as Libra, as in library, but I prefer Libra. That's how I was taught. That's what I'm used to, so I'm going to call it Libra, okay? So that's where we are. Libra begins September 22nd and ends October 21st. So if you're born in that time frame, you are a Libra. Libra is one of the cardinal signs, and as I mentioned in other segments, there are 4 cardinal signs, one for each of the 4 elements. Libra is the cardinal sign for air. And air is what epitomizes intellectual activity. So most Libras are very much involved in their head. This is a wonderful characteristic because you find a lot of intellectual quality there. I think of it as a very cerebral type of sign because they have that great sense of thought. They spend a lot of time in that realm. Some of us are more like the earth signs, are more inclined to, be farmers and builders and working with those kinds of, sort of foundational things, and water signs deal with more emotional issues, and fire signs are more involved with motivational types. But air signs, and there's 3 air signs. Libra is the cardinal air sign. There's Gemini, which is the mutable air sign. And of course, there's Aquarius, which is the fixed air sign. But we're talking about Libra today, and that is a cardinal air sign. If you don't know what cardinality is, I will be doing a series about the various modes further down the line, and I'll get to that at some point in time. So don't worry about that. What's most important to remember about Libra is their ability. The Libra is represented by the sign of, it's considered to be the sign of the scales. And it is one of the few signs, if not the only sign, if I'm correct, that is not actually bound to a particular animal or some sort of characteristic like that. So in astrology, most of them are tied to that. But in the case of a Libra, it's bound to the balance. And balance is perfect because balance means just that. It means equanimity. It means coming to the point where things are balanced. And it's no small irony that this happens at the autumnal equinox. The autumnal equinox this year falls on September 22nd, and that is when we have equal parts light and equal parts dark in the day. So that's the point which is met on the other end of the spectrum, and the exact opposite when Aries enters in, and we have the vernal equinox, which is equal parts light and dark as well. In the case of Libra, we start our journey now into darkness, and that does not mean anything other than the fact that the planet is shifting and more darkness descends, at least in the northern hemisphere. So as that encroaches and moves on, we will gradually work our way towards the next cardinal sign, which is Capricorn, where we have the shortest day of the year and we have less light and more dark. The opposite of that is in the summer solstice, when we have more light and less dark. So we're in that realm of time. So in that realm, we see this great ability to have this balance. So balance is perfect. Everything is weighed evenly, and that's one of the greatest things about Libra. This is where you find your judges. This is where you find your deep thinkers. This is where you find people who are looking for equality. As I get into the list further on, I'll tell you some of the great Libras that are out there, and you'll immediately understand what I'm talking about when you see who's the Libras, because you'll say, oh, of course they're Libras, because they have this sense of balance. It's interesting because they are often found in situations where they are the diplomat. The diplomat is the term that we use for the person who's striving to keep both sides happy. And that's the idea. And if you can't keep both sides happy, at least convince the other side that you're trying to keep them happy. That's part of the deal of diplomacy, right? The definition of diplomacy is getting your way, but making the other person think that they got their way. So that is kind of a seed of an idea of what a Libra is. It's that sense of balance. But they're very, very cerebral. Cerebral means of the head, of the intellect. They are people that are deeply involved with conversation. They are deeply involved in deep philosophical thoughts. They live in that realm, and it's a fabulous realm because they are allowed to get much done. But because they are a cardinal sign, they are an initiating sign. They are the ones who are leaders of the pack, so to speak. And they're leaders of the pack in the world of intellectualism and cerebralism. So we'll see that as we move on further down the way. As a result, they tend to be very unselfish people. They're very giving people. They tend to give of themselves because they are always trying to strive that balance. And they have balance. They have a great sense of proportion. They love proportion. Proportion is an element of beauty. When we look at a painting or a photograph, we're always looking at the elements of the proportion, and this is where Libras have a great affinity for art and beauty. You'll find many, many women who are Libras work in the beauty industry. This is incredibly obvious. You go to any beauty salon anywhere, women, and you will find a handful of the people in the salon who are either the hairdressers or the makeup artists or anybody who deals with that aesthetic. Aesthetic means the way things look. Those are going to be the Libras. So you'll find your makeup artists, and the same is true for theater. You'll find all those people are involved in that kind of that thought process. They're very pragmatic, they are aesthetic, they're fair, and they always strive for justice. Justice is a hard quality to come by, especially in a world where we have such polarity. The whole world, all of astrology is built on polarity. If you think of the opposite side, and we always do that when I try to talk about these signs, the opposite side is Aries. Aries is very much about being impulsive. Aries is like ramming through the chart, ramming through the woods, charging headstrong. Impulsivity is the word. Libras are just the opposite. They weigh both sides of the coin very, very heavily. They're always trying to find the duality. They're always trying to find both sides and to try to find that happy medium. And in that quality of striving to find the happy medium, they often become concerned and bogged down by their own sense of equality, meaning that they flip-flop. Now, many signs flip-flop. Geminis flip-flop, sometimes Pisces flip-flop, because they have a dualistic quality to them. But Libras in particular, because they're always striving to find that balance, they may go to bed at night thinking one thought and wake up in the morning and go to the exact opposite. So this is also a characteristic, as I said many times, all astrology signs have assets and liabilities. These are things that we have that are, what I would say, good points and bad points. Just like all of us, just like everybody in the world is a composite of good and bad. We all have these characteristics. But Libras in particular have that ability to balance and to judge and to sort of weigh things out. Weigh things out. That's the critical word here, is to weigh things out. When they weigh things out, they are coming up, and oftentimes there's that indecision. And that indecision can be critical because if you're a judge, for example, and you're trying to, know whether or not to convict somebody, you've got to do a lot of work. Again, that cerebral quality. A lot of work around the idea of who's right, who's wrong, and they toss those ideas back and forth. I can almost guarantee that many judges probably deliberate for quite some time over the verdict in a court case because of the simple fact that they probably can see both sides. And I know that when lawyers go to law school, oftentimes they have to do what's called a moot court. And this is very common for lawyers. They do a moot court where they are required to argue both sides of the argument. So they may be for something, they may be against something. As a practice of part of what it means to be a lawyer, they have to argue both sides because that shows that there's that sense of balance. Now, not all lawyers are Libras, but it is a good snapshot of what a Libra looks like. It has that quality of justice and fairness for all. The interesting thing about it is that the ruling sign for Libra is Venus. Now, Venus, as we know, is all about beauty. So again, that gets back to that aesthetic view that we see in the beauty salons. The beauty salons, interior decorators, designers, anybody, especially with women, especially the female, who have that strong aesthetic sense. And the reason I mention that is because in my observations, Libra men may very well have a similar quality, but they sort of manifest it in different ways. They tend to be more pragmatic with their sense of balance and proportion. They may be more pragmatic and driven by, more mechanical kinds of qualities. And I'm not trying to be sexist in this. This is just a fact. When you go to a beauty salon, you're going to find the people who are there. Interior designers often have that strong Libra quality because they're trying to find balance with colors and the way things look. It's about presentation. That's why the aesthetic view is very important. And you understand what I mean by aesthetics. It's that the way things look. When we look at photographs, there are certain rules that go with photographs and with paintings. That's called the rule of thirds, or what's called the golden section, which has to deal with proportion. It's a mathematical component of proportion which makes things look better. Like in this perfect example, I am in a situation in a screen where I'm in the rule of thirds because that is what's pleasing, and I'm off to the side. It allows the eye to wander a certain way. This is the essence of aesthetics. Aesthetics is the construction, appreciation, and illumination of beauty and proportion. Color, quality, all of those characteristics are very crisp and clear in what we see when we look at a Libra. Now, people who have Libras, as we know, you could have your Libra sun in any one of the 12 houses going around, and we're going to talk about that next. A Libra in the first house is a real, true Libra. You would recognize them by their beauty. The woman, a Libra in the first house, with a Libra sun in the first house, would have a strong, beautiful quality about her. You could see that sense of grace and dignity and the color coordination going on. Very good. Libra sun in the second house would be very indicative of someone who was able to work in the finance world and was able to balance budgets. Balance, again, is the word. Balance is very key. When we look at the third house, which is the house of communication, and we see a Libra sun born there, this would be a person who does communication and is always looking for, maybe on the editorial board or the opinion board, where they're trying to find the optimistic way of presenting, or again, in diplomacy. When we look at Libra in the fourth house, which is the house of home and family, we might see a strong Libra who's always trying to find a peaceful way to solve the problems and make sure that all the children in the house get the equal share of proportions, for example. That's very much the case. When we see Libra in the fifth house, the sun of Libra in the fifth house, this is where we see the strong artistic line of the person coming through. See this very strong aesthetic eye, the painters, the poets, the musicians. John Lennon is a very strong Libra, and we'll get to the list later on of people who are famous Libras. But that's where you'll see that kind of quality happening. You'll see that sense of strong melody and artistic balance always there. Very, very unique. Then we move on to the sixth house. The Libra in the sixth house is the person who strives. This is where you might see the lawyer who strives, because the sixth house is the house of service. This is where people serve. If your sun is in Libra in the sixth house, and that is based on your birth time for all of the ones I've mentioned, you would find someone who is very keen on serving others and using equality as their charge to arms, so to speak, their raison d'etre, their reason to be. This is where balance is pretty clear. So you'd find your lawyers there trying to find the balance between the client and the courts, for example. When we move into Libra in the seventh house, this is the natural spot for Libra to be. This is the house that Libra rules, and this is the house of relationships. Well, we know that for a fact that if relationships are to work, they have to be equitable. At least the ones that do work, at least the ones I've been in, if they're not equitable, I know pretty quickly. And I know a lot of Libras in my life because I'm on the opposite side of the spectrum. But the Libras in the seventh house, if your sun is in Libra in the seventh house, your whole goal is to find equanimity between the process of the relationship. Well, if your sun is in the eighth house in Libra, your sun sign is going to be representative of trying to find the balance between these big issues between life and death, sex and death. That's the house of regeneration. So there's always going to be this process of trying to regenerate and doing it in an equitable, balanced fashion. This is very key. It all comes down to balance. Balance is the key word. If I had to pick one word for Libra, balance would be it. If your sun is in the eighth house, I already did the eighth house. If your sun is in the ninth house, this is the house of travel, education, spirituality. Oftentimes we'll find people who are in the ministerial roles there, ministers, pastors, priests, nuns, monks, and so forth, find themselves there. It's also the sign of the traveler. It's the sign of the educator. So you might find a teacher with a strong with a sun in the ninth house. That brings someone who tries to bring equanimity and balance into the classroom. When we look at the 10th house is the house of career and vocation. If you see a person with a sun in the 10th house, you're more than likely going to find someone who is a judge or a lawyer, again, because that's the occupation. But their whole role is surrounded by the idea of cerebral, being able to think, being able to lead, being able to be an initiator in both those fields, in both those areas, and bring equanimity to the process. The next house is the 11th house. This is the house of groups and business associates. So, if your sun is in the 11th house and you're a Libra, you would know that you do very well in group situations. You have a great sense of trying to find harmony, diplomacy amongst your team members, especially if you're in a work environment where you have to, get multiple sides to agree to situations that may not be quite so easy. There's always that chance of, trying to be a diplomat in a situation is very difficult. And then finally we move to the 12th house, which is the house of transition. House of transition is closing one door and opening another. So in that process, we can actually see the same sort of dichotomy, that same parallel. We see one door opening, one door closing. There's an equal motion there. So again, that comes down to balance. It's how they mitigate loss and how they move on forward from there. Very critical piece. Now, in order to find out where your sun is in that chart, you've got to go to my website and look up your chart, or contact me, Chris at Turning of the Wheel. My website is there. Hit the contact button in the top bar, and you can get your chart there, and you can see where your sun lands. You may be a Libra, but what house you land in is critical to who you are, because it also is based on the time of birth. If you don't know that, best thing to do is to contact me, get a professional reading, and you'll be surprised at how accurate it is. I know you better than you can imagine without ever having meeting you. And most of my clients I do over the phone from who knows where across the globe. And when I talk to them and I know what their chart is, boom, I get it. Got it? Boom. So before we move on to some of the famous people who are Libras, I want to read something out of my book here that I think really summarizes Libras in a very succinct way. And I think I want you to be able to tease out of this what I've said in order to get the right idea. Okay, so here we go. The Libran's sense of fair play is so strong that he can become increasingly indignant if he thinks that he, or anyone with whom he identifies, is being unjustly opposed upon. See, there's that judgmental piece of being the judge, looking for equanimity and fairness. Despite his peace-loving nature, he will, when necessary, fight for the rights of others, often in courts of law. This sign is noted for its lawyers, judges, diplomats, social workers, and military commanders, all of whom, in one way or another, attempt to adjust the balance of power between individuals, groups, and another attempt to adjust the balance and nations, and strive to see that everyone receives his rightful due. That is Libra, in a nutshell, without any question in my mind. That is Libra. It's incredibly there. Also, in astrology, we have planets that are known as exalted. In Libra, the exalted planet is Saturn. Saturn is the planet of responsibility. It's the planet of duty. You've heard me speak about Saturn in the past. Saturn is a taskmaster. They keep you on track. And there's always that sense of duty. So if you've got Saturn in Libra, you've got a good placement, and people probably know that you're incredibly responsible and easy to rely upon. This is a really critical piece. Now, I want to get into a list of some famous Librans, because this will really crystallize the idea, because you'll be able to say, oh, of course, after you've listened to what I've said about who they are, you'll be able to hear and see why these people are who they are. And the first person I'm going to bring to light to you is probably one of the most famous people, famous Libras in the world, and one whose whole life was dedicated to the rights of others, trying to find equitable and equal share for all people, leveling the playing field and changing the course of history. And his name was Mohandas Gandhi. Gandhi was the great Indian leader who rose out of the 1930s and 1940s, right before India came to partition, where they divided. This was a man who started out as a lawyer. His formal training was as a lawyer. He went to England, studied law, and as a result of being an Indian in an English society and then coming back from an English society into the Indian society, he felt as if he was betwixt and between. In that, he sought to strive equanimity, and that was sort of his whole modus operandi. Everything he did in his life was to try to find balance and equality between the upper caste and the lower caste societies and groups of India. And he is highly regarded and revered throughout the world for that process. I mentioned John Lennon earlier. John Lennon was the head leader of the Beatles. We see it in him, his great, strong sense of aesthetic, and his songs are very cerebral. They may be obscure, they may be abstract, but we know that there's a lot going on there. This is a man who thinks, and he was a huge proponent for peace, trying to find equanimity and calm in the world as we knew it. Another famous world figure from history who was a Libra was Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt was married to Franklin Roosevelt, and she sort of defined the role of the First Lady for everybody following her. Many times First Ladies had sort of a subservient role, historically speaking. But when it came to Eleanor Roosevelt and the time, of course, that she was involved, and of course the fact that Roosevelt was elected 4 times, if you can believe that. Many people thought that Roosevelt was a king because he'd been elected 4 times. As a matter of fact, because he was elected 4 times, we now have 2-term limits for all presidents going forward, which could be a good thing in some cases and bad in other. But I'm not going to get into that subject. Anyway, Eleanor Roosevelt did a great deal of good in the world, trying to bring notice to people who were handicapped, trying to bring notice to people who were down and out, trying to raise the level of everything. There's that great quote, you know, a rising tide lifts all boats. She was the person trying to raise people up, and she did an enormous amount of charitable work and was a wonderful diplomat and sort of a emissary for the United States, even though that was not her role. Her role was simply to be the First Lady and be married to Franklin Roosevelt, who also was another different, he was an Aquarius. But interestingly enough, Eleanor Roosevelt was a Libra, which is an air sign. Franklin Roosevelt was an Aquarius, which is an air sign. It's no small secret that they got along. Whether or not their marriage was harmonious, and we know it wasn't, that's beside the point. They shared an intellectual love of ideas, and it was the cerebral connection that held them together. Oftentimes you'll find in friendships, if you look at your own friends, you'll find that they share a certain element, or at least an element that's clear. It's in the same realm of what they're in. You know, if you have a water sign, maybe your best friends are earth signs, or you're also water signs. Air signs typically get along with fire signs, which is why Libra is air and directly across the wheel is fire. Opposites attract in that case because they bring to the table those qualities that each person needs. The Libra needs more fire, and the Aries needs more balance. So you can see how those work. And that's true for all the way around the zodiac, regardless of whether it may be Taurus or Scorpio, regardless if it's Aquarius and Leo, Cancer, Capricorn, Gemini, Sagittarius. The whole show is there, Virgo and Pisces. All of them have their opposing ideas because we are dualistic people. We live in a dualistic world, whether we like it or not. We have 2 eyes, we have 2 ears, 2 lungs, 2 legs, 2 arms, etc. These are minor illustrations of what we look like, but we have day and night. We live in a dualistic world. Granted, there's a lot of gray in there, but we do live in a dualistic world, and that's why astrology is incredibly accurate. Now, we're going to get into some more interesting names here. Johnny Carson was a Libra. Now, you remember him as the great night show host. He was a very quick-thinking guy, highly educated, very quick on his feet, very cerebral, loved having great conversations, could do both, could be a comedian and could be deadly serious at the same time. He had that sense of balance. Many of you may not understand, maybe not remember a famous author named Truman Capote, fabulous writer. He wrote In Cold Blood, he wrote Breakfast at Tiffany's, and he was well known in the New York scene at that time, very strong. Again, very intellectually driven. His whole modus operandi, his mode of operation was based on the brain. This is what all air signs do. Interestingly, another very famous Libra was Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin, supposedly, of John F. Kennedy. I'm not going to spend much time on him. I don't know enough about him, but I just thought that was an interesting counterpoint. We don't quite know. He may have been conflicted. He may have been a person who had conflict between good and bad, and that shows that desperation to try to find equanimity. Who knows? Maybe if he waited a day, he would have thought completely different and not gone through with the process of the assassination. That's the sort of thing that a Libra would do. They might wake up and say, I'm going to go assassinate somebody. The next day they'd say, well, I guess I won't do that. Well, don't we wish that he had waited a day or two? Who knows how things would have been? Jesse Jackson is another well-known Libra. And you can see in his work, depending upon how well you know him, what he has done. He's always tried to find that balance between race and politics and all that stuff. And he is very much of an epitome and a disciple of Martin Luther King. Again, coming back to that idea, very much of a fervent talker, a great thinker, you know, sort of a wide span range of ideas. An interesting one is Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin is a Libra. Now, many of us would say, he's a dictator, he seems like he's more of a ruler. He is a ruler, but he is managing, or trying to manage, I would say. I think that's the key word, he's trying to manage. He's trying to manage the balance between being the president of Russia and fitting in with Western society. So he's always working between that. He's trying to fit in both worlds. So we sort of see that Libra quality there. He's a very interesting person. Whether you like him or not, that's beside the point. Benjamin Netanyahu, the president of Israel, is also a Libra, and I think that's a really interesting place for him to be because, again, he's trying to find balance. Neil deGrasse Tyson is a Libra. Now, we've seen him. He's out there in the cosmos floating around trying to tell us how the world works and how we got to where we are. Very, very interesting guy. Has a great sense, and his whole process is this big, big thinking. He's like where did the cosmos come from? Why are we here? How did we get here? Where are we going? These are all big, big questions. Very typical for a Libra. Libras like the conversation. They like the conversation. And if you want to know more about Libra, I encourage you to go to my website, turningofthewheel.com. Click the contact button. You can find your rising sign there. There's information about your signs. I encourage you to come and contact me for a reading. I will tell you where you are. We have a few more names I want to talk about. One is Will Smith. Will Smith is a famous Libra. So is Simon Cowell. You remember Simon Cowell from the Dancing, not Dancing with the Stars, but the America's Favorite Audition, whatever. You know the show I'm talking about. If you watch TV, you know who Simon Cowell is. He was one of the judges of the show. How appropriate is that? Perfect place for him to be, trying to decide who's the best singer and all that. So that's very key. And finally, one of my favorite people is Barbara Wallace. Barbara Wallace is a Libra because she is the person who'd sit in between the interviews and ask balanced questions. Always, again, she's a very, very intelligent, cerebral person who understands the logic of what's going on and is always trying to make that, you know, get the thing down so it's right. She's trying to say how, you know, ask probing questions and then come back and go back. So she's always there, and she's on The View as well, or she used to be on The View, and she'd be part of that group. Again, for her, it's all about the cerebral quality. So this is a pretty quick summation of Libra. If you want more information, especially if you are a Libra, I encourage you to contact me at turningofthewheel.com. It's my website. I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube, I'm on television. And my other website is turningofthewheel.tv, where you can get ideas also. But if you really are interested in astrology, and I encourage you to, because there's great wisdom there, you'll find an awful lot about yourself, people who are in your lives, why your relationships work and why they don't work. And I encourage you to follow it. My newsletter comes out every Sunday evening. You can sign up for it there. And I look forward to talking to you again as we move our way through the zodiac. Take care.